Hey folks, Kai Andrew here. Now, I've been a long-time student of construction. I consider myself a professional builder and investor in real estate, and I started with just a business degree, actually a business and construction engineering degree. I eventually got my MBA where I focus on finance and operations, got started with startups, but I've always been involved in real estate. Nowadays, you can see me working on highly unique types of properties like shipping containers, domes, tree houses, that type of stuff. We're actually inside one of my container homes right now. I'm actually converting this one into our future studio / game room where I can paint my little dollies like Warhammer 40K and play Dungeons and Dragons with my buddies. But today, we are going to be reviewing one of the most popular types of properties or builds that is taking the nation like wildfire, especially because of the income potential. Tree houses. Nope, I'm not talking about the tree houses that you would build for your kids in your backyard. I'm talking about tree houses that you can actually live in and rent out for $4, $5, $6, $7, up to $1,000 a night. Do these make sense? Are they affordable? Can we sell it? Can we get financing on it? Let's take a look. We're going to start by reviewing a couple of popular builders and other YouTubers who've toured and built these tree houses.
First thing is how important the bark is to the tree, because it gets all the nutrients up to the tree and allows it to grow. So we don't want to fasten any of our structure directly to the tree.
Now this is really important because when we're dealing with tree houses, trees are something that's living and breathing, and a lot of times they're growing. Just because it doesn't look like it's growing or it's really strong, that's not true at all. So whenever we start to tap into trees or we start taking away their bark or drilling into them, you are exposing it to illness, sickness, disease, mites, beetles, which is a really big thing. So very, very important that you come at this strategically. You don't just start hacking away at your tree and then you cause it to die.
We also have to make sure that we allow for the growth of the tree. Not only does it grow up, but it actually grows out. So we have to allow.
This is also very important, is that the tree, as it's growing and you're building something, your house isn't supposed to move, but your tree will move. We'll probably address that a little bit more later. But a lot of people don't consider that the tree is going to be expanding and getting tall at the same time.
Hey, Kai from the future here. If you're into unique homes like the tree houses we're talking about, or cool container homes like the one that I'm in right now, we've got a lot in common. Now, if you want to learn how to build places like these as investments or income opportunities, you've got to join me on October 12th for a free live webinar. I'll walk you through the exact steps that we've used to build out these properties, but just as important, if not maybe more important, is how to find the right markets and locations to create multiple income streams. No replay for this one, so make sure to save your spot. That's Saturday, October 12th. Link is down below. Can't wait to see you there. Now back to critiquing tree houses.
We've got to drill it deep enough for this to be flush with the bark.
All right, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why I don't like it. Now, I'm not a tree expert by no means, but I do have trees. And actually, we have properties in Austin which they take oak wilt and the oak trees very, very seriously. Basically, you gotta be very careful when you cut open or you trim oak because you can introduce disease and beetles or insects. And so when you're drilling into a tree like this, especially this big of a bore, I'm sure the tree specialists and experts out there is like, no big deal, it can heal from it. It's taken a lot worse, no big deal. I still do not like the idea of doing this because it's kind of like dealing with a shaky foundation. Like, I don't pour a foundation with concrete that may or may not just crumble on me. And so it makes me feel a little bit finicky that I'm dealing and drilling into something that's alive, hoping that it doesn't die or get some sort of disease. If you guys have followed, I believe it's Japanese beetle, it has decimated the tree population, I believe in Arizona, all the way through the Pacific Northwest. Whenever you start cutting away at the bark, it's kind of like scraping away at your skin, is that you're able to get a lot more infections and stuff in it. So I like to be a little bit more mindful. But this stuff, even if somebody says it's safe, it makes me a little bit nervous.
That hole is sufficient for the diameter of this collar right here. Now we have another smaller diameter for this section and even smaller still for the threaded part. So 2 more bits, 2 more holes. Got the plate on already, that's key. And then we've got this nut at the end. All right, now give it a turn with that. Now we're setting it into the tree.
So This old house, this is where I learned a lot of stuff over the last, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. I used to watch them, I believe it was on HGTV. I forget what I was watching on, but then I started watching on YouTube, and I've learned a lot from them. They really do know what they're doing. But in this case, they are building a treehouse for their kids. However, the science of it is relatively the same. So you'll notice that, I hope we're going to notice, we're going to probably see the very similar type of construction when we start graduating up into tree houses made for adults with the modern comforts.
Okay, so now if you want to give me that level.
It is actually really cool how far building science has gone. From those old tree houses, I don't know if you guys ever played them. I played in them when I was growing up, where it's just literally nailed into a tree. And now you've got all this really great steel and all this great stuff that's been engineered appropriately.
You can tack that right there.
Good.
Yep.
So tacking is actually a really OP'd technique when it comes to construction. You'll see this all the time. I'll put up on the screen right here. Is that a lot of times when you're building, people try to hold it there and they try to then drill it into place or get it perfect, and then they just can't because it's not stable for whatever reason. Quite often the most frequent thing is like building walls, 2x4 walls, right? But you'll often see that the professional builders, what they'll do this thing called tacking. Well, they'll get it to a point exactly where they want it, and then they'll just nail or place 2x4s or other lumber around it to hold it in place as they build everything out. So this is just an example of tacking where they'll eventually remove that 2x4. I think that looks like a 2x4. And then they'll continue building out what they're doing right now is they're building out the floor system, and then they'll come back and they'll remove the 2x4s once it's all stable.
Okay, good. Now we get a measurement in between and run a header.
Now, when you're building anything, especially like a home or a deck, or I don't have any exposed beams here, but when you want to make sure that you're using the correct hanger, and this is where it's really important that you work with a structural engineer. So this is a hanger that's engineered for this specific type of project based off the weight. You do not want to just use screws or nails or anything like that, because eventually those can fail, they can rust, and the hangers are designed and engineered to hold the weight of whatever that you're trying to carry. In this case, it's going to be a live load of probably some kids playing around. So not super important, but these are definitely over-engineered. Use the proper hangers and use the proper screws or nails in this case. It could literally save your life. A lot of times I've seen people do this on their decks or they do it inside their homes and they don't use the proper hangers. Big no-no, won't pass inspection, and especially for a treehouse where there could be moving and swaying, even more important.
So we've got the beam hanging on these bolts right here, and then we've got all the joists laid on top of the beam. So those are supported. Now we just have to support this end of our frame here, Tommy.
Right.
So I know this just looks like a little platform. It is kind of a little small platform, but the building that they're doing is very similar to any type of home build, shed build, or any type of structure, or even a deck. And so the biggest question that I get a lot these days is, how much does it cost me to build? And for something like this, tree houses can cost quite a bit, but to tell you the truth, it could actually even be a cost savings, because what's the one thing that's missing here that you'll notice is that they didn't have to excavate or pour foundation. And concrete costs, labor, and excavating and removal of trees can get really expensive, from several tens of thousands even into the hundreds of thousands. So you can potentially save money here. At the end of the day though, they're still doing standard construction, which is probably the best way of doing it, just to make sure that it is engineered correctly, and they're doing a good job here. Typically what I tell folks is that if we're building something out on a larger scale, you can expect, with bathrooms, kitchens, and everything, you're going to be spending somewhere between $200 and $250 a square foot. But I wouldn't be surprised, depending on the materials and where you're building, it could even creep up to $300 or $400 a square foot.
So now what we've done is we've actually jacked this up out of level just a little bit. Before we put this in, we want to put some tension on it. All right, you ready?
Yep.
Another important thing here, so the tree is acting as our base, and as things move and weight, like live load, which is basically human load, basically when you're walking back and forth, you can cause things to sway. And so what we want to do is we always want to make sure that we have the right, what is called cross bracing, in this case, they're going back into the tree. The great example of what I learned in engineering school is that if you think about force or load, it travels down like water. Okay, it tries to find the area, tries to find the best way to go downstream. And so in this case, we want to be careful when you get too far away from the main base or the foundation, which is the tree trunk itself, is that it's going to have to travel a really long distance to get to the tree. And what happens is that's where you cause failure. And so if somebody's staying on the very edge, what we want to do is make sure that force has a way to escape and go down, all the way down to the ground and back to the foundation, which is the tree.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scribe that board to the tree.
Okay.
I'm just going to take my scribes and randomly set them apart. Now the key when I scribe across the tree, I want to make sure that I hold my scribes parallel with the board's joint.
Why is that?
Well, because if I go like this, I'm not going to get a true cut.
I see.
So I'm going to go like this, hold it in, keeping it parallel with the edge, come out, come around, go down and around.
So this is, actually, when I work with carpenters, I'm always in shock and awe. I'm not considered a carpenter and I'm not that good. I can cut, but it doesn't look super pretty when you start doing this type of stuff. So using that, what he's doing is basically cutting the wood so it matches to the bark of the tree. Now, this is where the issues can come up that I really am not super fond of.
Look at that, perfect.
pretty good.
So now what we need to do is pull it back to create a space for the tree to grow. All right,
Awesome.
All right, so what we just saw there is exactly, and they're doing the right thing here, is that he understands that the tree's gonna grow, so they need to cut that out, but they also wanna make sure the lines look clean so the tree can grow into it. Now, the big thing is what lives on trees? Insects, squirrels, rodents, sap, right? And so when we have these openings to allow for growth, it also allows other things to get in. And if it's not insects and rodents, it's moisture. And so this becomes that challenge where you're fighting against nature to figure out what works best for you. Is there a solution to it? Sure. Is it permanent? Probably not. And will it cost you a lot of money? Most likely.
So you can see that we got some stain on it. We added some decorative skirting all the way around the perimeter, and up top we've got a couple surprises. We've got a telescope.
All right, so we can see that they definitely built this for their kids, but what I really liked in terms of construction-wise, they did this the right way. They used the engineered, I don't know what you call them, the bolts, the things they put into the tree themselves, and also how they built out the joists for the floors, the posts, the cross bracing, all of it. Awesome work. I'm interested to see how we're gonna move forward to apply this for live living with modern comforts, not just for kids playing outside.
Hey, I'm Bobby and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna start building a tree house.
Here's another channel that I really like. I like to make stuff. Matt, I've been following for a very long time. He's helped me with a bunch of stuff just throughout the years, just stuff that I didn't know and I was able to learn just with a quick little Google or YouTubing.
Many years before we got here, this tree got hit by lightning and it killed a bunch of the branches right in this area. But luckily that gives us a really good...
Okay, and that gets us to one of the biggest things that I dislike about treehouses. Now it sounds like I'm really anti-treehouse. I'm going to be building one in the future. I'll tell you guys more about that here at the end. But it's dealing with nature. Storms and lightning are two very real things that have taken down a lot of trees, especially trees that are sick or are not as strong as they look. And so the fact that it's been hit by lightning before means it can be hit by lightning again. And not only is that a danger to obviously any type of humans inside the structure itself, but it can also damage the structural competency or strength of the structure too. And so if you're building something for your kids, and obviously your kids are inside during a storm and it's struck, okay, you're out maybe a few $1,000s. If you built a house on it that costs you hundreds, if not several hundreds of thousands of dollars, now we're talking about something a little bit more extreme.
We finally got all the dead stuff cut out of the tree and now it's time to start building. Now when you build a tree house, there's a bunch of different ways to do the platform and a bunch of different ways to attach it to the tree, and it really depends on the tree that you're working with and where your platform is in relation to it. Ours is going to be attached to the tree on one side and going out. So to attach it, we're going to use something called a tab.
Okay, so it's called a tab. I was calling it a bolt. Not too far off, but kind of looks like a bolt. But yeah, so it looks like he's using the same thing. It looks like maybe it's a slightly different design. Maybe it's a different load, or he's not making one as large. But he's doing the same type of signs where he's bolting into the tree, and then basically that's going to have, I believe it's going to have a platform, and then he's going to build on top of that platform of the bolt. So nothing is actually going into the tree other than these 2 tabs, or maybe 4 tabs. I have a lot of respect for people who build their own places. For one, I know what kind of crazy hard work that takes. So it's always amazing. I fall into these rabbit holes all the time, watching other families and other people build their own homes. Mad respect to them. This is the Treehouse family, and they built this amazing treehouse that I believe is on Airbnb and doing really well. I could be wrong on that, but let's take a look at these guys as they start building out the first treehouse that we're going to see that is meant for full-time living for a family with all the modern comforts. All right, this right here is exactly why you always want to make sure that you have another buddy around or a friend helping you out while you're doing construction. I cannot tell you how many times I've worked by myself. I've probably worked by myself 80 to 90% of the time. And just having an extra set of hands to do something like this, whereas I would be silly yet dumb enough to do this by myself with like a come along or my truck or doing something to try to put this thing up by myself. But you can see when you have 2 people, it's still tough work, don't get me wrong. But it does make it easier to have somebody spotting you, somebody else helping you, and just it can go so much faster, and it's a big safety thing. Also, just in case you do get hurt or something happens, you have somebody else to help you. I've been just really fortunate, knock on wood, that I haven't had anything crazy happen to me when I'm building by myself, but there's been a couple close calls for sure. So what you can see here is that they're actually building this not in the trees or around trees. It's actually built onto piers. You can see that those are piers right there that they've put down, assuming they put down deep enough with footings, and they're building on top of it. So it negates a lot of the issues that we were talking about before with the tree growing, leaning on everything. However, there is this tree right here that looks like they're really stinking close. It could just be the angle. It could be maybe several feet away, but still that's a little bit too close to comfort for me. And the reason behind that is that regardless you're building a tree house or anything, whenever you start building really close to trees, you start having issues with roots. You also have issues with branches falling, and especially the tree being able to fall on your house itself. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, and definitely now as the beetles came through and we actually had a lot of forest fires come through and it has weakened trees, there are tons of damages to homes, and even people getting hit and hurt, even potentially maimed or killed from falling branches and falling trees. So when I can help it, I always try to remove trees if I can, if I'm able to. Otherwise, I try to avoid building directly next to a tree just for insects, rodents, root issues, and then obviously the more extreme situation is where the tree can actually fall on the house itself, and now we're talking about some serious damage. I love it when they do this. I love it when they build 2 different structures, but it's still the same house, and they're going to connect it. I believe they're going to connect it with like a sky bridge here. I don't know if these guys are contractors or builders or not, but it looks like they're doing a pretty professional job. This right here, what we see, it looks amazing so far, and I can see some really good windows and maybe even an oversized, maybe a garage door or maybe some sort of big like trifold sliding door. But this is actually one of the simplest types of construction. That's why we see it happen so often, and you can really dress it up with really high quality material. It's just a shed style type of home or cabin. So if we're looking at this here, and I don't think it's just the angle, but they actually have a tree going through, which I'm assuming is the deck on the exterior, and then going through the roof line right there. This is something that we've seen very common in Texas, especially in Austin, because you cannot remove certain size oak trees. And so what people do is literally have the oak trees going through like their sunroom, going through their deck, going through their homes itself. We'll put some photos right here with some examples. But I've always been not a big fan of this, okay, for many reasons that I've already said originally, but now you're just introducing yourself to a lot more damage, a lot of potential issues with that tree, especially this being looks like it's a younger tree that's a little bit thinner. That one's gonna sway and swing a lot more. And now you have it tied to your, it's inside your, basically inside your home or inside the build of your home. So whatever they're doing for their soffits or whatever they're doing for their roof and for their decking, it could potentially rub up against it, hit it, bust it, or, you know, a really big gust could actually go either direction. And trees, they can move quite a bit. We're not talking about just maybe an inch or two. We can talk about they can swing and sway 6 inches all the way to 12 inches, maybe even more depending on the size and how strong the wind is. So this actually turned out really, really cool. And it looks like they did end up putting in a garage door. So that was the opening I was saying before. A couple of things. Well, first of all, I would never put garage doors inside homes. It just doesn't seal super tight. And especially in areas which I'm assuming that this gets pretty cold, just looking at the foliage, you're gonna have leakage and it's just gonna get really cold in there. And you have this giant window of walls, or sorry, this giant wall of glass that's just not gonna be super energy efficient. But if you don't care about that and you got a big burning fireplace or something like that, go for it. It looks really cool and you can really open things up. It turns out really, really well, and I believe this is on Airbnb, and I think the last time we looked at it, it was doing exceptionally well. So as in terms of investment, love it, beautiful. So when it comes down to building any type of structure or investing in real estate, it comes down to 3 things. The first thing is equity creation. Number 2 is tax savings or tax deductions. And then number 3 is cash flow. Now, most people focus only on the cash flow, which is great, but compared to the other 2, it's by far the weakest. When it comes to this in tree houses, is that we want to be careful with how we can take advantage of those 3 things. Now, if we step into the other lane real quick, and I'll tie it back together here, there's 3 types of customers when it comes to real estate. There are the guests or potentially your tenants, whether you're doing long-term, short-term, doesn't matter, your guests or your tenants. And then number 2 is lenders, banks, and appraisers, okay? They're kind of, I group them all into one. And then number 3 are future buyers. You need all 3 customers in order for you to make money. Now, let's say that this comes out and the banks don't want to lend on it. It doesn't meet their portfolio, or it's too risky, it's not marketable, whatever, they'll come up whatever reason they can't loan on it or lend on it because it's too unique. That will happen. That will actually happen more often than not. Now, just because you do find a buyer who wants to buy it, they may not be able to pay you the $500, $600, $800 million because they can't get lending on it. Now, all of a sudden, your pool of potential customers, it gets narrowed down, and then now you're in trouble. So when we're building these, we have to understand that we're putting ourselves into a corner a bit, and we have to do everything that we can to make sure that we can still get to those 3 customers, and at the same time, still access the 3 strategies when it comes to real estate. So with this one, I think they did a really good job. Hopefully it's done up to code and permitted, so that way it makes it a little bit easier with the 3 customers, and it definitely can meet the criteria of cash flow, equity, and then tax savings. Nice work. Like it. So here's another one that I stumbled across, and I've come across this several times just working with our clients and our members. This is a tree house, one of multiple tree houses on a property in Asheville, North Carolina. Fun fact, they've been listed for $20 million for several months now, and I believe they just went pending. So a great example of how you can turn these tree houses into a business and even insane equity. But let's take a deeper look at these ones. I believe this was the first one on the property. Okay, so a big question I get to, other than the cost of building something like this one is, I believe these are, they're completely built around and onto trees. You can see these cross bracing here onto the trees themselves. That is going to be, that's actually a little bit different than what they were using earlier. This looks like steel. It's a lot simpler to use than if you're using lumber or, and you can do a lot more of them. They're easier to handle, easier to install, and so you can see them all down here. But the other question that I get a lot is, how do I run utilities into a tree house? Like, it's floating up there, how do I do that? Well, you can see it right here This is a column where they tuck away all of their wires, conduit, piping, even from this heat pump, this ductless heat pump down here that's going to the head units inside. They're running all of those coolant lines and electrical cords and electrical lines all the way back in just through this column. But we can see the foundation here with the metal bracing, and then also we still see this utility corridor, this utility column where they're running probably the main power and everything up into the property itself. Not quite sure why they decided not to run this in there as well, but maybe it's just easier because there's already an opening right there, and they just decided to go right up the tree here.
So let's now finally open up the door and come inside to check out what the interior has to offer. Walk into the main living room.
So you see here, this is what I really start liking about tree houses, is that it has this wow factor from the outside, but then on the inside, you can do anything that you want. It literally looks like my grandma's cottage, right? It's really simple, it's relatively simple to do anything that you want to do on the inside, and here it looks a lot more homey. And the fact that it looks homey, it can be really beneficial for folks who are trying to get away from the city, but they just want to still be able to experience the modern luxuries of just, city life. But you have the novelty of being high up above the treetops or in the treetops itself, and you can get a lot of bookings that way, which obviously they've been very successful with.
Now, as we walk outside, here is your magnificent view looking into downtown Asheville. We even got the Smoky Mountains there on the horizon in the distance.
Yeah, one of the benefits of being in a treehouse is you're going to have insane views. You're going to not have all that vegetation in front of you, and most other people are going to be all down below you or building below you. And so you quite often will open up into beautiful views like this. If you don't have a view like this, I would probably not build a treehouse unless it's really you're getting major cost savings from not having to excavate or pour a foundation. But really, with treehouses, what really sells them is just not the novelty of looking at it and saying that you stayed in a treehouse, but it's obviously the view itself. So this one just knocks it out of the park. That's definitely a wow view. So you can see here in this old house, remember how they had to build around the tree? They were trying not to be so tight. This one looks pretty snug up against the tree, and it could just be the angle. But yeah, that's pretty tight. And the other thing too that makes me nervous, and I could be wrong, again, not a tree expert, but just the building science in me, is that it doesn't look like that's enough room for something like a storm to come through. And they're on this hillside where it's exposed to probably a lot of wind. I don't like that. Just the fact that it could easily blow back into the house, it could sway back and forth left and right, and it can knock away those boards, or it can even knock into the house itself. It probably obviously has not done that yet, but I just don't like that option. But I'm probably a little bit more conservative when it comes to how I like to build my structures.
This deck is the fact that this tree, the same one that we saw earlier, goes straight through the deck all the way up top, and it just towers over this tree house. This is, again, a true tree house, not just a cabin on stilts. Doesn't get much more legit than this, and I just fell in love with the deck and this view.
Yeah, so this looks super, super cool. The problem that I've seen so far is obviously lightning can hit this, and you see all those branches up there, those can all fall onto your treehouse, and that's a lot. You're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in potential damage, and then even injury to whoever's staying inside the home. So absolutely love tree houses. If I had to do this, I would probably do it, what was it, the third video, when the family that built it up on stilts next to trees. I would still be cleared away from the trees just to give enough room for them to sway, and then also if their branches dropped or whatnot, it wouldn't damage my structure. But I could still be in the treetops with them, and I know that I'm on a permanent fixed foundation that's secure. I really am not a big fan of how they're doing here, even though it looks really, really cool. The other big thing here too is that we have to be considerate of not just the customers, those three customers we talked about, but also the three ways of making money in real estate, but also insurance. Building this treehouse right here, I can guarantee you, I know they built it before the pandemic, so let's say that even cost them $150,000 to $200,000. That's $150,000 to $200,000 that you most likely won't be able to get insurance on. Maybe you can go to Lloyd's of London or something like that, but most other local policy holders, they won't be able to write a policy on this, right? Especially if you didn't build it up to a certain quality, certain code. It looks like these are all built to code. based on what I can see in the video. But that's something to consider too, is when you start building a tree house, you wanna make sure that you get the right engineering done. There's actual tree engineers that can do this for you. And then also talk to your current or local insurance provider and make sure that they will be able to insure you on this. And I would definitely check to make sure that local lenders will either finance it, which I can tell you right now, they probably won't. But also if you decide to sell it, just ask them like, hey, if I get a tree that is permitted, inspected, and also has insurance, would you be able to lend on it? And see what they say. Okay, so that was really fun. I'm a huge fan of tree houses, and I can't wait to build one. I'm gonna build mine a little bit differently. Like I said, I'm gonna do mine on stilts up above the oak trees in Austin. And so we'll just see this rolling hills of trees once we have that completed. Now, like I said earlier, the cost is gonna be relatively the same as a standard home, but you could actually see some savings away from not having to excavate, pour the foundation, or anything like that when you build around a tree. In my case, with the stilts, it's gonna be pretty much the same cost, if not a little bit more, because I have to get some more engineering and most likely work with metal to make sure that it's secure, especially 20, 25 feet off the ground. But the key thing here is to assume that you're not going to be saving money on building a tree house, assuming that it meets code. You have all the modern luxury comforts. So on my list of things that I don't like based off what I saw is I never build a structure, wanted my foundation to be able to potentially move, die on me, or get a disease. It's just not good. When we build foundations, it is by far the most important part of your entire structure. If that fails, your whole structure fails, and now you're actually risking the safety of the people on the inside. So when you're building around a tree, you have to understand that between storms, wind, snow, insects, disease, old age, could all take a toll on one tree, and you're dealing with multiple trees, so you have multiple chances of something failing. And if that tree fails, what do you do next? Do you have an option? And if you don't have the money to fix it, I mean, that's a substantial problem if you built onto a tree and that tree dies or gets hit by lightning and needs to get cut down or whatever. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you're completely at the mercy of nature. So echoing back to the tree potentially dying is that you're just kind of like at the mercy of nature. You can't really control lightning storms or anything like that. The biggest thing is going to be about the money. I think it's going to be incredibly challenging to find a bank that's willing to finance you building a tree house. I think it's going to be really difficult to find potential buyers and potentially find the right insurance providers. With that all said, I believe that building the right tree house in the right area can absolutely be a cash flow machine. Okay. Now, being a cash flow machine but never being able to sell it, that's another conversation for another video. But I absolutely love tree houses, and it's one of the reasons why this one's on my short list of things I'm gonna be working on next. Now, here are the things that I really like about tree houses here. Like I said, they can be cash flow machines. You get insane views above everybody else. You're being by far probably the most unique structure in your area, unless you're like in Hocking Hills or something where everybody's building a tree house, it seems like. You could potentially save money by not having to do excavation and pouring a foundation if you build around the tree itself. There are also tree engineers that also team up with structural engineers to make sure that you're as safe as possible when it comes down to actually building the tree house. And they're just simply cool. I mean, if you guys think about it, the people that are staying in tree houses today are millennials and boomers. And those are the folks that actually have the most money in the economy right now and traveling the most. And it reminds them of their childhood, just like me. And it's why I want to build one, and that's why I stay in them, is that you are catering to your audience, which is going to be most likely boomers and millennials. Or sorry, Generation X and millennials. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click on my face right here, click and subscribe to the channel for a lot more content just like this. And you want to learn a lot more about how to build unique structures, finding the properties, finding the right piece of land to create multiple income streams, hey, it might be worth it having a conversation with me and my team. You can schedule a time with me or the team. And if you're not ready for that yet, I've also got about 45-minute free training down below on how we do stuff just like this. I'll see you guys next time.